Hi friends! If you're new here, welcome. In this video, I'm going to be doing a little sit down and talk about 4 different projects that I've done in the last few months. Projects that I'm not making an entire video on, but I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with them and construction techniques and various things. The first one is this linen blouse. So this is a pretty basic linen blouse. The construction is almost exactly the same. Not almost exactly the same. It's quite similar to basic squares and rectangles like 18th century European construction. So the only differences are there are no cuffs. I just did a straight sleeve. And then for the collar, I did a curved collar. As you can kind of see there. In the sleeve shape, I did end up curving this just slightly, which I realize now because how dropped the shoulder is, it does look a little bit odd, so I probably wouldn't do that in the future unless I'm narrowing the main body piece enough to like bring this shoulder seam up to on my shoulder. It is kind of like the shirt that I'm wearing right now, which is the kind of standard 18th century pirate shirt, poet shirt, which will be linked here, here, here. Yeah, it's linked here. But as you can see, it wears with a very drop shoulder on me, which is kind of the historically accurate fit. But this, I narrowed it a little bit, but I didn't quite narrow it enough to get a more modern placed shoulder seam. So the curve in the arm piece was a little bit unnecessary. But basic rectangular sleeve, we have a square underarm gusset. We have your square folded in half. Excuse me. The back is gathered slightly, and yeah, there's no gathering anywhere else. So this shirt is quite lovely. I was going for more of a simplified version of an 18th century men's shirt without all of the gathering and ruffling. But what I ended up with, especially with the lack of cuffs, which was actually a necessity just because I ran out of fabric, I really had barely any fabric to work with for this, so yeah, there was not much to spare. But yeah, because of the way that the collar turned out and the lack of gathering here and the lack of cuff, it actually ended up giving a very Eastern silhouette. If you're familiar with like Chinese historical clothing from the 1800s, it does give sort of a similar effect there. Maybe I can insert some pictures, but this sort of flat construction of a body and a shoulder and a sleeve, like with no curves, the way that an 18th century European outer clothing would be, the way that it came out gave a very Eastern shape and silhouette and feel, especially with the collar. So I actually really love that, and that was kind of unexpected. The next thing is this basic Historybounding lace-up bodice. Now this I made in, was it a 1-day make? It was either a 1-day make or a 2-day make. It was quite simple. And the patterning for this literally can lay entirely flat. There are no curves. I think there are no curves in this entire thing. It's all straight lines. To create the pattern for this isn't a patterning tutorial, but I'm just going to quickly go over what I did. It's basically just a shape that fits my waist to bust, and the measurements that I used are my waist minus about ½ an inch, or maybe just my waist, kind of fluctuates, but the waist is quite close to my waist measurement, while the bust has about 2 or 3 inches of negative ease, so smaller than my actual bust measurement, because for something like this, I wanted to be able to either lace it with a tiny lacing gap or to lace it closed and actually be getting some bust support through that. This is not a strictly historical piece. Again, it is definitely a history-bounding piece, but it is kind of, it reminds me of kind of like a 15th century kirtle a little bit, like the top part of a 15th century kirtle, as well as some of the later silhouettes. First of all, fabric choices. The outside is a wool, cashmere, and synthetic coating fabric, which is quite thick. And I could definitely make something like this again with a less thick outer fabric, but I had some scraps of this fabric from a commission project in kind of small weird shapes, and I thought, what can I fit on that? Maybe something like this. And then the inner fabric is, what is this? The inner fabric I think is a cotton poly blend twill. Yeah. This is just a cheap fabric that I got. I think it was like discounted somewhere. And yeah, I took the outside and the inside, and I just literally did a bag lining. Like, as you can see, these edges, excuse me, yeah, the edges, there's nothing special about that. The lining comes all the way to the edge, so I really did just do that. I sewed them together, right sides out, left a hole, flipped the entire thing right sides out, and then I did have to finish just this part separately, but yeah, the entire thing pretty much was just this flat shape that I could sew around all the edges and turn right side out. And then I did a hand sewn edge treatment just because I thought it would look pretty. So there's a running stitch going along the edge in cotton embroidery floss. And yeah, then there are, excuse me, please focus. You can see them a lot better on the inside. They're hand done eyelets in black silk twist because I did have some black silk twist. So yeah, that's that. The eyelets are quite small holes simply because I didn't have a proper awl when I made this. So all the holes were poked with a needle and then a larger needle, and then I tried to like use the back of a paintbrush, which kind of works in a pinch, but it's really a lot more of a pain than just using an awl. So if you have an awl, definitely use your awl to make eyelets. So yeah, that is this cute little history bounding top. Here are some videos of me wearing it. The next thing I have is this super simple history bounding apron. Now, I think I made this last night in about 2 or 3 hours, maybe it was more like 4 hours, but I made this entirely by hand, which is not a necessity, I just felt like it. And it's super, super simple. It's just a big rectangle of white linen that I roll hemmed. This is actually my first time doing like a real rolled hem where you actually take the fabric and like roll it, which I didn't quite realize was possible, but I think part of that was not working with linen, because I'm pretty sure that the term rolled hem started when people were mostly sewing garments with linen and things like wool. So that's my theory, but yeah. Please focus. Yeah, the hem is really, really small. I'm not sure that this is necessarily like a historically accurate apron for any specific thing. It's just literally a rectangle hemmed, and then I gathered it and put it into a waistband. This is a normal like double fold, excuse me. It's a double fold waistband, as you can see. So I gathered it, and then I sewed it with a back stitch to one side of the waistband, or one long edge with the edge turned under, folded the rest over, and finished the other side by hand, and then I sewed down all of the ties. I've seen people wear aprons like this for 18th century clothing, as well as some like medieval, and definitely between there. Yeah, it's just a cute little like history bounding cottagecore apron that I can throw on top of pretty much anything. The last thing that I have is an unfinished project that I'm not sure if I'll ever actually finish, which is why I want to talk about it now, because I do have some ideas and feedback for myself. about if I were to do something like this again, or the fact that I would not, but it is a waistcoat. And as you know, I've made 2 waistcoats before, but the difference with this one is that it is a much more modern fit. The front piece, rather than having these 2 or even this 1 Victorian dart that create this Victorian waistcoat shape, or late Victorian waistcoat shape, this is more of a vintage waistcoat, so it's cut a little bit higher. It doesn't have the slight bottom part of the waist. It really just goes like this, and rather than have just these vertical darts, it has a bust dart and a vertical dart, and they're both kind of straight darts, not these like curvy darts. So yeah, the patterning I'm not mad about. The reason that I stopped partway with this, and as you can see, it is a tailored garment. I did pad stitch the lapels. There's a facing here. I was gonna add a collar, and the reason that I stopped working on this was because I actually just really was not enjoying working with the fabric. Now, this is a wool synthetic blend, and I've worked with wool synthetic blends before that I liked, but the thing about this one is that it feels kind of just like polyester when you work with it. Which means that for hand tailoring, where you're doing a ton of work, where you're holding the fabric and hand stitching and basting and all of these things, I was just not motivated at all to work with this. Can you make a tailored garment with a fabric like this? Yes. You can't do all of the pressing and shaping that you could with a natural fiber, but you can definitely get some shape. I mean, you can see that these lapels, they're rolling pretty nicely. It's not tailored. The tailoring is working. It's just the experience of working with this fabric, I personally found to be not at all motivating. Generally, I love hand sewing and I love feeling the fabric, and especially working on tailored garments. And I've worked on fabrics that are definitely part synthetic before, but and okay. So the thing about wool and synthetic blends is that when they're a small percentage of synthetic, usually what they'll do is they have a synthetic fiber and they wrap the synthetic fiber in wool. So you're feeling wool on the outside, but you have the cheapness and well, it's not as cheap as synthetic, but wool is quite expensive. So adding some synthetic does bring the price down a little bit, as well as it makes it stronger sometimes. So fabrics that are a small part synthetic and a large part wool are often really, really nice to work with, actually, and I highly recommend them. But this to me feels like it's more synthetic than they could be doing that with. It doesn't feel like wool really. It feels kind of like a blend. But once you start working with it, it really has like the qualities of a synthetic fabric. So my recommendation for people, as well as what I'm probably going to do in the future, is if you're on a budget or if you can't afford something that's mostly wool for tailoring, go with a cotton flannel, or a linen if you can, but a cotton flannel is probably going to be the cheapest option. The first waistcoat that I made was with a piece of cotton flannel that I think someone gave to me for free, and I had a wonderful experience working with that fabric. So, I mean, is it possible to create a tailored garment with a fabric that is mostly synthetic? Yeah, and if you want to do that, if you have a fabric that you're attached to tailoring, absolutely you can do it. But I'll say, if you're going to pick out a fabric and you're on a budget and you can't afford something that is mostly wool or 100% wool, go for a cotton before you go for a wool blend that is like 50-80% synthetic. That's my personal opinion. If you have the choice, go for a cotton before you go for a wool, because it's going to be a lot nicer in your hands while you're doing all of this hand tailoring. And tailoring is something that takes long enough that you want to enjoy the process. If you're only doing it for the end result and you don't enjoy the process, you're going to have a really hard time, just because it is such a tedious process to tailor that you really have to. In my opinion, it's not really worth it if you're not enjoying the process as well. So yeah, I will put this on just so you can see the fit, and I might pin it closed. I may make another waistcoat with this pattern. I might finish it. I probably won't finish it. I don't know if I'd add a collar just because then I have to create a collar with this fabric and spend more time pad stitching this fabric, which I really don't want to do. But yeah, there you have it. I forgot to show you the inside. Here's the inside. A lot of basting, a lot of hand sewing. Edges are all turned under. I really did a lot of work on this, honestly. Other unfinished projects that I could talk about, but some of them may or may not turn into videos, so I think I'll leave it at that for today. If you want to see more videos like this where I talk about projects that are already finished and I don't go into a lot of detail on construction, but I just kind of give an overview of projects that I've already finished, let me know. Let me know in the comments below. Yeah, I will see you again next time, hopefully. Bye!
Thank you.